Hi, Susan. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you? Can you
I'm
hear
good.
me?
I can. Can you hear me?
I can, and I can
Great.
see you.
Great. Did you have a nice Mother's Day?
I did. I had a really peaceful Mother's Day. How about you?
Yeah, it was nice. It was nice. Really, the
Yeah.
kids breakfast in bed, the whole thing. So that was really special.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
great. What did you get to eat?
Pancakes and some scrambled eggs. Although once I was
Excellent.
in bed with all the food, they just wanted to eat it all. So I might have had like two bites, but
I
that's
was
fine.
gonna say, when you said pancakes, I was like, that suspiciously sounds like, a menu choice that might have had more to do with them than you, but
Yes, 100%. Yeah, but the bites that I had were great, and I'm always happy when they're eating something. So, how about you? Did you have breakfast in bed?
I did not. I did not, but I had a really lovely day despite
So
that.
I have to ask, did you somehow reunite with your hairdresser? Because I've been watching your Instagram posts about how sad you are that you don't have the same perfect bob as last time, but it looks so perfect to me today.
Oh,
Did
you're
someone
so
come over? How
nice.
did you do it?
No,
No.
there's been no reunion and no one has come over. I love that. My hairdresser, who I adore, actually posted a video of himself on Instagram, like that style of like the Bob Dylan holding the placards and then like
Yeah.
going through, and the message is like, "Don't touch your hair." I Nothing's happened to my hair except that I flat iron it like a crazy person so that it's all just gonna fall out one of these days. This is all an illusion. Like, I think it probably looks a lot better than it feels because of my
Well,
cruel, constant ironing to keep it under control. So that's my quarantine secret.
quarantine secrets, love it. Well, whatever you're doing, I will have to invest in a flat iron, I guess, because maybe that's the trick. um,
Yeah, I have to say, I couldn't live without it.
all right, who knew? There you go. Well, thank you. Thanks for doing this with me. And I know you have a big event tonight at McNally Jackson with Michael Cunningham. Is that right? Or did I get it wrong?
Yeah, yeah. That's tonight at 7. We're really excited. And I just, one of my favorite writers, but also one of my favorite people. So I'm so excited to talk to him. I love talking to him about anything. The fact that we're going to talk about my work seems to me like surreal. Maybe we'll just talk about other stuff.
Yeah, you'll have to just divert the conversation back to his work or something.
Yeah, or just, him, his career, his writing process. I'm excited to just kind of talk about writing with him. We're also colleagues. We teach together, and so we might even talk about that. We might even talk about our lives as teachers, which is a really important part of life for both of us.
And you went to Yale and you teach at Yale, is that right?
Yeah, yes, that's right. I went to Yale a long, long, long time ago, and I've been teaching at Yale for not that long. I've been there since 2015.
I went to Yale too. I
I
wish you'd been my teacher.
know,
Yeah.
I know, but I don't think we overlapped.
No,
I
I
think
don't
I'm
think
older
so.
than you a little bit.
Although I have to say, the writing class I took at Yale was one of my favorites anywhere, and I wish I could remember the teacher's name, but it was like a
Oh, me
prose
too.
writing class, and I still have the essays I wrote for that. I should dig them up somewhere.
You
Like,
should. I'd be
yeah.
so curious to know who your teacher was.
Oh,
There
she
there
was
are
so
people
good.
who are there are people who have been there a long time. I think it's a great place to teach. The students, this is going to sound immodest, so I'm not talking about myself, but just from my experience, the students are amazing. My students that I teach. When I was a student, I don't think I was amazing, but as a teacher, I find the students to be just incredible. I love teaching them, and I learn a lot from them.
Like, I feel like the standards go up every year. I feel like there's no way I could get in now that if I were like a young person, like, as opposed to
Oh,
43, like forget it.
I mean, I'm not commenting on you. I'm sure you could. I feel the
I
same way about
couldn't.
myself though. Absolutely. And like good friends of mine that I made while I was at that school, we all agree, we would never get in today. We were so lucky. I mean, I was clueless, when I arrived there, and I mean, clueless like about a lot of things, but also just academically not super prepared. And my students are just radioactive. They know so much. I don't know how it happens. They're
I know. It's
they're
kind
so
of
smart.
I'm feeling badly for my own kids who are very bright, but I don't know. I mean, you have to be like a rocket scientist to get into school these days. But anyway, that aside. But so much of what you end up writing about takes place in academic settings. And so I feel like you must have this special affinity towards not only teaching, but writing about teaching. It's all sort of becoming very meta, like you're doing
Yeah.
what you set out. Tell me about this draw you have to sort of academia and also writing about it.
Yeah, I do. I sort of feel like I need to get over it and stop writing
No,
about it.
no, I hope I
No,
didn't
but
make you feel that way. Not at all.
no, you're not at all. But it's funny. Like one of my dearest friends said after reading a draft of a new book of mine, he said, "You just can't leave academia alone, can you?" And that was my second book. And so and now with five, it's pretty clear. But I think part of it is just my background. My dad emigrated to this country from Korea to seek an education, and he became a professor. And he, is one of those parents who really, if he imparted anything to me, it was the importance of education and how much it would mean to him for me to get an education. And so that's sort of what I grew up with. And I think I think like if I'd grown up an army brat, maybe I would write about the military, but I grew up in that culture, so that's the one I write about. And now I work in it too. I'm a teacher, and so I'm thinking about students and teachers all the time. And I also think that the relationship between students and teachers is it's super ordinary because we've all had that relationship, and it also can be really fraught and like rife with danger, depending. I mean, it's the kind of relationship that can span the spectrum from being hopefully just a basically successful relationship to not hopefully, but often a really, really strange relationship, and so I think I'm always drawn to when relationships that could be normal aren't.
Have you ever had an experience with a student, even since 2015, that's towed the line of normalcy in some way?
That's a good question. I want to say, from my perspective, the answer is no. And I hope to God that that's true, and that I don't have a student out there who feels like I crossed the line or, abused my relationship with them in some way, because I think about it all the time. I think constantly about the fact that it's not just by like not doing evil that you're a good teacher. You have to really kind of actively do good. Do you know what I mean? And you have to constantly be thinking about the fact that you have more power than your student. Like, even though these students are, like we just said, so smart, it doesn't mean that they're my equal. I always have more power than they do, and I have to be careful. Anyone who has more power than somebody else has to be careful all the time. You can't just sort of assume like, oh, I have good intentions, I'm not going to do anything that's going to hurt anyone. So I hope the answer is no. But it's
And
complicated.
I meant it more from their perspective, not that you would abuse your power. I mean, I felt like that went without saying that you would not do that. I just meant
God, I
like,
hope not.
did you have any, I feel like adolescence in that particular time of life is when so much comes out. I mean, different mental illnesses, and not to, I mean, this is sort of going on a tangent, but like even things like schizophrenia and all these things come out during adolescence. And I always wonder,
Yeah.
like, if you're a teacher in those scenarios and different kids have different things occurring to them, how does that all interact? And anyway, I
Oh,
don't
yeah.
know.
I mean, it's complicated. Yeah, I've had students who were troubled. I've had students who had terrible experiences elsewhere in the institution that they, needed to work out. I've had students who clearly like were struggling with things, and um, I've always hoped to be helpful, but it's so complicated. It's so complicated. I think students are dealing with so much. It feels to me like, they're both smarter than we used to be. Again, not you, Zibby, but me. But
No,
also I feel
you
like,
can please include me. Yes,
but
for
I
sure.
just feel like their world is so much more complicated now than at least my world was as a student. And there's just a lot, there's a lot to deal with. This idea that students are snowflakes, I think, is really unfair. I mean, I'm like, look at the world our kids are growing up in. This is not like, look at what we're doing right
I know.
now.
I know.
Look,
I
look at
know.
what's happening. So they have a lot. to
Yeah.
deal with. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, tell me a little more about how you approach your novels. So you've each one I've read, it takes you about 5 years on average to write. And then trust exercise was almost like your diversionary tactic from procrastinating from another book that you
Yes.
were also and perhaps still writing. So tell me just
Yes.
a little bit about that and how you pick your projects and what the process is like when you're writing.
Yeah, trust exercise was my diversionary project, but that doesn't mean it didn't also take 5 years. It's like, even though it was a side project, I was also working on it for like at least that long. It's funny, the way I work has changed so much. And I'm only like now wrapping my mind around how different it is. When I wrote my first novel, I had been struggling for so long. I had pieces of it that really came out of like writing I was doing when we were in college, like short stories I was trying to make work. I went to grad school, I was still trying to make it work. I still just had a pile of junk. I left grad school with like nothing to show for it and had a full-time job, and I would like go home at night and eat a can of tuna and just like try to make this book work that I'd been dragging around for years. And it finally came together like a patchwork quilt, like of all these different pieces. And after that, I was like, I will never write a book like that again. Like that was a mess. So I started doing this thing where I would write a book almost like on a dare to myself. Like this happened with my third book and my fourth, where I started and I thought every single day I'm going to write forward and I can't look back. I can't change anything. I have to like write a certain number of words a day or I don't get lunch, which is super motivating. Like if you start working in the morning, I'd be like, I've got to make my word count or like no lunch. Sounds a little obsessive,
Did
but it
you ever
worked.
did you enforce that? Did you go days without lunch as
No,
a
no, no.
punishment?
I just wrote bad words.
You just
I
did
mean,
it.
not
Okay.
bad words, like cuss words. I mean, I just wrote like bad writing. It's like anything to get to lunch. But so I wrote these books like in this kind of super rigorous way where I just like drove myself forward, and in the end, huge amounts of revision were required. Like one of these books, halfway through, I just hated one of the main characters so much. I just like continued as if she didn't exist anymore. I was like, she just can't be here. And I was like, I'll fix it later. And I did. Another one of these books, it was in first person. And at some point I was like, this is unbearable. And I switched to third and I was like, I'll just fix it later. And so that worked with those two books. And I thought like I had it all figured out. And in fact, would tell my students, like, this is how you write a book. And then it just all fell to pieces. And I was trying to write this book that is the one that, like I've mentioned in interviews at Trust Exercise, I could make work. I was doing all my old tricks, lunch, word count, forward every day, and it was just horrible. It's like a truly, I mean, you'll have to take my word for it because it's never going to be published in its current state. But this book just doesn't work, wouldn't work, and I was so yeah, I was just so thrown for a loop because I was like, I thought I had the formula and I didn't. And so meanwhile, just in order to like make that daily word count, I started kind of doing other things on days that I just couldn't stand looking at this book anymore. And trust exercise ended up being one of those other things. And it was years, like years of running away from this bad, failed project and kind of like sneaking into trust exercise and writing enough to earn lunch. And then, after many years of this, I realized I have a big pile of this trust exercise thing and I have a big pile of this other thing and I need help. And so I showed both piles to my agent and she said, I think it's the trust exercise pile we're going to go with. And it was such a surprise. But, and now all bets are off because I'm like, clearly that like recipe that I figured out for novel writing was not the recipe. Like now I have to invent it all over again.
Oh my gosh.
A little
So wait, so
demoralizing.
or maybe it's just the one book that didn't fit. Like maybe that's the aberration that's the
Yeah,
outlier.
maybe. I mean, it's also kind of empowering, I have to say, to just sort of realize like there's all sorts of different ways to do this. And, you know, I've now kind of stumbled upon a couple of them. And
Hmm.
there's probably as many other ways as there are other writers. And it's actually been great for my teaching too, because I tell my students, I'm like, you know what, there's like no secret to this. You may think you
Yeah.
found the secret, and it's going to stop working one day, and you've just got to roll with it and be like, I guess I have to find a new secret.
This is reminding me so much of parenting because as soon as I feel like I have one
Yes.
thing nailed, this is how I handle tantrums, and like the next day comes and it doesn't work, and I'm like, oh, I thought I have no confidence now because I can't
Yeah.
rely on anything. So
Oh
it,
my God. And you
in
have
so
four
many things.
kids, right?
Yeah, I have four kids.
Yeah, see, I only have two, and I've totally had that experience already. Like with my first one, we did sleep training. My first one is he's 15 now, so this is a long time ago. We did sleep training. He was like the textbook baby for sleep training. We thought we were such geniuses, like the annoying parents of one child who would tell every other parent of a newborn, like, "Oh, it's just like this. This is all you have
Yeah,
to do. Just get this book. Everything will be fine." Our second child came along, again, all bets were off. Sleep training, total failure. It's exactly like what you say, where we were just like, it's as if we've never had a child.
yes, yeah.
I can't imagine having that happen four times.
Oh, I know. I mean, I can't even like remember the sleep training of the last one, but well, I did have twins, so it wasn't, one
Oh
after
my
another. So I
God.
cheated in that
Well,
way. No,
I'm
but
so glad
just
they
like,
brought you those pancakes yesterday. You deserve like,
yeah, I deserve pancakes like wrapped in gold or something, but it's
yeah, and
okay.
a split of champagne too.
Yeah. No, but I feel like I talk to a lot of authors who say the same thing as you, that with each new project, it's never a sure thing. And I think from a reader's perspective, having followed careers like yours and other authors, you just assume that when they start their next book, like boom, no problem. But it seems to me that everybody is filled with all sorts of insecurities and worries, and like that it's this like magical thing that happens and it might not happen again. And it's so interesting to hear that this
Yeah,
has basically happened to you.
absolutely. I mean, I'm always, not to be judgmental, but like when writer friends that I know speak of just like always doing things a certain way, or just, having everything under control in terms of their process, I'm always like highly suspicious. I mean, I don't think they're deceiving me, but I find it really hard to believe, because I find it so much more common to, talk to other writers who say, yeah, I feel like I've never done this before.
Yeah.
I mean, somebody can be mid-career, even late career, and they're like, I just don't even know. It's like I'm just starting out. And again, like it's useful for teaching in a way, because I always say to my students, I hope this isn't discouraging to you, but yeah, there's no like crypt of secrets that's being like guarded by those of us who've published books, and like you're never going to get into it. I'm like, we don't know. We just like we have managed to figure it out like totally through trial and error, sometimes more than once, but it just keeps being the same trial and error.
Yeah. So
I think it's
why
just you get
though?
used to it.
Why do you keep going back to the book that you feel like is so difficult and it's not working? Why not just abandon that project and start something new?
Oh
Like,
my
what is it
God.
about that project that's like making you
Yes.
like keep
You're
hacking
agreeing with like the
away?
devil on one shoulder who's like, just dump that project. I'm
Well,
like,
no,
I
I'm
should.
not trying to encourage you to dump it. I'm just saying there must be something really compelling about it that makes you keep going back to it. It'll
Oh,
probably end up winning like the National Book Award again. It's going to be this like amazing book for the ages. But what is it that is like your stumbling block with it? And what is it that keeps drawing you to it?
yeah, no, Zibby, I was hoping you were encouraging me to dump it. I was like, yeah, I should just. Um, no, so this book is complicated because it's about my family, and so I think in the same way that like your family is, and I mean my extended family. It's about my grandfather mainly, and somewhat about my father. Um, and family history is weird that way. It's like sometimes you just think, I don't want to deal with this. I don't care. Like this is the past. I'm shutting the door. But you never can, right? You can like never shut the door on your own family's history. And also, it's really compelling. So my grandfather, this is my dad's dad. My dad's a Korean immigrant. He came to this country in the mid 50s after the Korean War had ended, and his family was I think, like a really remarkable and sort of fascinating family. My grandfather, his father was a scholar, a literary critic, a fiction writer, a translator, and his focus was English and European literature. So all of the stuff that I was studying in college, my grandfather, that was his field. And I mean, he did crazy things like translated Joyce into Korean.
Oh my gosh.
What? I mean, can you even imagine?
What? No.
And not speaking Korean myself, there's like no way for me. I mean, I can barely read Joyce in the language in which it was written. But anyway,
Uh,
so I'm fascinated by this person because, not only did he love the things that I love, literature and writing, but he also had a really sort of he had a really kind of controversial career in Korea because of Korean politics during his lifetime. Korea was colonized by Japan. It was a very unhappy relationship. And so, without like getting too complicated, because we could talk about this for an hour, and I've been researching it for a decade. Um, Under like the colonial occupation of Korea by Japan, if you were a successful person, that was suspicious, right? Because, what were you doing to make the Japanese authorities leave you alone?
mhm.
Um, my grandfather published a literary journal, and during the war years, when, Japan was allied with the Axis powers and was sort of using the Korean Peninsula as like a staging ground for their war effort and imperial expansion and, committing atrocities in China and this is a whole lot of history here. It was very hard to publish a literary magazine, as you can imagine. That wasn't
Okay.
exactly a priority, and it was very easy to suppress that kind of publishing. If you were the Japanese colonial government, you could just not give people paper. You could just be like, "We're sorry, little seditious Korean patriotic magazine. We're just out of paper for you. Oops." And no one in the international community could really accuse you of censorship because there's just no paper. And the Japanese colonial government was really good at that kind of oppression. But my grandfather's journal had paper, right? He continued publishing deep into the war years, and after the end of the Second World War, when Japan was defeated and Korea was liberated, anyone who had been moderately successful during the occupied period came under suspicion, including my grandfather. What did he do to get along with the occupying forces? What did he do to keep getting paper? And it's such an unimaginable, thankfully, situation for us to live ourselves to. Sorry, I'm losing my words
Yeah.
here. It's unimaginable for us in the world that we live in now, blessedly. So I'm fascinated by it, and I'm always just wishing that I could learn more about what his life was like, especially because of these controversies. I think that kind of draws me, sort of irresistible.
So are you writing it as fiction or as memoir?
Oh, such a good question. That's one of the problems. I've been writing it as fiction, um, and it's not really working, in my opinion. And so I've wondered, like, is this a memoir? I'm not a memoir writer. I love fiction because I can take things in the real world that fascinate me, and then I can bend them to my storytelling will, and take liberties and make the best possible story without necessarily being bound to the facts. Because you know, facts are facts. You can't bend them if you're writing history or if you're writing memoir. So I don't know. I've been grappling
I
with
think
this
you should
question
try
for
it.
years.
I think you should try writing it all as truth and then go back and do your big edit thing and then make it better where you need to. But why don't you just get it all out? Just like get all the facts out.
Yeah, I'm trying, and it's interesting because every time I think like, oh, I'm so done with this, something happens that kind of pulls me back. Like just last week, this professor, an American professor at the University of Minnesota, got in touch with me and said, I've learned that you're the granddaughter of this literary figure. I'm translating his work into English, and I need permission to publish the translations. And can you give me permission? Because I don't know who else to ask, really. And I was like, oh, here I am hooked again. Because my grandfather's work is still relevant, kind of intellectually and politically, and people are working on it. Scholars of Korean history are actually studying it. So that makes it hard for me to just go, I'm not gonna look into it anymore. So I'm gonna try what you suggested. Write it all down.
Give it a shot. Yeah,
just give
write
it a shot.
all down. Think of me before lunch. Then as you're having your tuna sandwich, you can say, see, that worked so well today.
I will. Or I'll text you and be like, damn you, Zibby, I can't do this and I'm hungry.
I'm sure you'll find the words. You can just bang on I mean,
Thanks.
research counts, but anyway. Well, I had wanted to talk to you about trust exercise, but all of this stuff is so interesting to me. So much more interesting. I mean, not more interesting, but just the idea of how your creative process is working.
It's fun, to talk about it.
But what was it like? What was it like for you? And I read one interview when it was about to be the award ceremony, and you were trying to be all cool about it, it's okay if I don't win, it's just an honor to be nominated. But then you went up and won. So I was just wondering, what was that like? This sort of Oscars of the literary world feeling? Was it like an Oscars ceremony for you? What was that moment like?
Oh my God, it was like an Oscars ceremony for me, and I'm gonna cry. I'm so grateful. I mean, obviously, I'm so grateful to have won, but I'm so grateful we had a ceremony, when I think about that night, it was in November, November 19th or 20th. It was the week before Thanksgiving. And just the excitement of I rented a gown. I didn't own a gown, so I rented a gown, but I really liked it. And, getting dressed up and going to this ceremony that started with a huge cocktail hour and everyone buzzing and, elbow to elbow, meeting other writers I really admired. John Waters was there in a brocade suit that was to die for. And I was so tongue-tied. I literally I stood next to John Waters like a weird stalker for maybe 10 minutes and couldn't even bring myself to introduce myself to him. But just that excitement of being in a room full of people, I hope whoever is nominated for the National Book Award this year and for any other award like that, I really hope that they get that celebration. I just thought it was amazing to have that experience and then actually win. But now it was just amazing to have that experience, and then afterwards there was a dance party. And at some point I was like, oh my God, it's almost 2 a.m. I have to go home. I haven't been up this late since I can't remember when. So it was such a fun night. It was a blast, I have to say. I feel really lucky to have gotten it.
Oh, that's such a nice story. And yes, I feel like there's so much longing now for all sorts of celebrations like that one.
Oh, I know. I mean, we appreciated them then, but God, we just had no idea how much we would miss it.
I know. It's really crazy. So do you have any other side projects that you're using to get through your other big project? Do you have another simmering novel that's treading along also?
I do. Yeah,
You do?
I do actually. This all kind of goes back to what we were talking about when we first started talking, about what I thought was my method and how it's clearly not, because...
So not your hair, you mean?
No, not my hair, that other method, not the ironing of my hair method. I used to really work on one thing, and I was like, this is what I'm working on, and working on anything else is cheating, and I'm going to stick with this until I finish. And I've found that I've turned into somebody who's working on a bunch of different things at once, and all the stuff that's been on the back burner for so long that when I actually look closely at it, I'm like, there's a lot here. So there is another project, in addition to this grandfather one, that is a story about a family And I started working on it years ago. And it's another one of these things that, like, every once in a while, for some reason that I can't explain, I want to write about them again. And I kind of go and find that file and add to it. And I've been recently looking at that material more. And it's exciting if something that you wrote like several years back still kind of captures your attention. You know, there's a lot of stuff that I've written that, like, I look at it again and I'm like, ugh, no. But this stuff is still, it's still kind of tugging at me, and that's exciting. So that's what
I feel like
I'm
I
that's
feel
what I'm
like
doing.
you're beating yourself up over your process when in actuality there's nothing wrong with it. It's just the way you work. It's okay. Like, it's great. How great to have multiple projects in the works. And
No, absolutely. I totally agree. And it's not, I wouldn't say it's beating myself up so much as, like, I'm constantly surprised by the changes, right? But I'm getting better about that. I think I'm getting to be more aware that there isn't one right way. You know what I mean? Um,
yes.
and that it's, like, really helpful to kind of be attuned to different modes in yourself, and not to think like, oh, I'm being lazy, or oh, I'm avoiding something, but to think like, oh, I'm in, like, a different mode right now. I'm in a space where this is what's interesting to me, and I can just go with that, and that's okay, instead of, feeling like I'm slacking off.
Yeah. Well, I feel like we are all in a different mode these days, so so
Tell
it
me about it.
makes perfect sense.
And we have a lot
Um,
of time to, like, be aware of our modes, right?
yes, yes,
And
a lot
and
of
to sort of reflect on them.
yes, perhaps too much time. Well, thank you so much for sharing your time with me today, and
Oh, thank
my
you. This was
listeners.
so fun.
Oh, it's fun for
It's
me too.
it's really great to be with you, and I have to say I'm so grateful that I've had my phone propped up between a pair of 5-pound weights, and I'm so happy that it hasn't fallen over. So it's like the little things to be grateful for in life. Thank you, 5-pound
Well,
weights.
I have not even like picked my weights up off the ground in the garage for this entire time,
Oh,
so at least you're using yours.
Zibby, I'm not using the weights to work out, but I
At
am
least
using
you.
them to prop up my phone, and they've done a great job. So thank you, 5-pound weights, and maybe I'll actually work out with you someday also.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks, Zibby.
All
Take
right. Take care.
care. Stay
Okay.
safe.
You
Bye.
too. Bye bye.